Welcome to the 6th episode of Inside Illustration. This episode is part of the fashion season of Inside Illustration, a biannual suite of content brought to you by the Association of Illustrators. We are a UK-based organisation with members from all around the world who support illustrators across all areas of their professional lives, offering business advice on licensing and reviews of contracts, as well as staging events, campaigning for illustrators' rights, and running the annual World Illustration Awards. Members of the AOI have exclusive access to the full range of content for Inside Illustration at theaoi.com/inside-illustration, where we have in-depth articles, a range of resources, and the opportunity for members to take part in an exclusive creative course on fashion illustration. I'm your host, Rachel Emily Taylor, artist, writer and course leader of BA Illustration at Camberwell College of Arts. Fashion illustration looks at the present, the past and also the future, capturing garments on or off the body in a myriad of incarnations, from haute couture to streetwear, not only reflecting the clothing from fashion designers. Fashion illustration embraces beauty products, hair, accessories, lifestyle, retail, footwear, celebrity, and also has its place as an element in its own right, as part of a garment, as a sculpture, or being produced at an event. Even illustrators who aren't focusing on fashion need to have an understanding of what contemporary people are wearing to ensure their characters are current. But in this session, we're talking to two creators who embrace fashion in a range of ways in their practice, Jessica Rose Bird and Daniel David Freeman. Jess, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and interest in fashion illustration?
So I am an artist and fashion illustrator based in London. I studied at Grey School of Art in Aberdeen, and I actually studied fashion design. And I did kind of like a general first year, which covered everything, fine art, design, and then chose to specialise in fashion. And then I worked in the industry for maybe couple of years, 3 years, before becoming a full-time illustrator.
And Dan?
I am from London. Same, I'm like an artist, but work as an illustrator and kind of use illustration as a kind of art medium at the same time. And yeah, I did BA illustration at Camberwell. And then through like doing DJing, I did a lot of flyers and stuff like that. And then that got me into doing editorial illustration. And then from that, did my own bits and bobs, did my own T-shirts here and there, which has kind of led to where the kinds of stuff that I'm doing now.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So I've got some questions for both of you. So fashion imagery has so many different types of applications. Can you both tell us about the areas that you work in? It's quite broad because your practices are quite different.
So yeah, I feel like it encompasses quite a lot. I work in live illustration, like events, which includes doing live portraits, live drawings, or live backstage at fashion shows. Everything from editorial illustration for magazines, artworks just for sale in their own right, windows in stores. Yeah, so many different things. Packaging. Yeah, kind of a broad spectrum.
What about you, Dan?
Yeah, similar in terms of it being very broad. It's fashion illustration in the sense that it's lots of illustration that ends up in the fashion industry somehow, some way. Could be like really basic graphic design, doing like CADs of T-shirts ready to be manufactured, all the way to doing art exhibitions within retail spaces. Yeah, just standard T-shirt designs is probably the main thing. But also within like my fine art practice, thinking about how you can use clothing in exhibitions as an art practice, and also like thinking about the wearability of images and how you can kind of employ like fashion illustration essentially as a art practice at the same time. But within that, the documentation of that as well, you know, making short form videos and using social media in a way that's kind of hopefully slightly creative.
So yeah, fashion embraces this whole range of illustration aesthetics, and it can be, say, traditional or like quite experimental, as we've kind of just been touching on. Is that something that you both welcome?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess because we now have photography to do what fashion illustration used to probably do, that allows contemporary fashion illustrators to kind of be far more creative in what it is that they're trying to do. So yeah, I definitely welcome it because I don't think I've got that much of a photorealist style. So yeah, it works for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides. I mean, I feel like you could be more creative sometimes using clothing and the way that you document clothing than other forms of illustration, 100%. But there is the one side that when you're working for clients, there's a wall that you often hit in terms of how experimental you want to be. You know, they're running a business at the end of the day, so it's fair enough. Often if you approach things like starting as experimental as you want, as you like, pitch that, and it kind of trickles down to something that might not be quite as out there as you'd pitched. But even that process in itself is an experiment, you know, thinking about what they might go for, what they might not, and meeting in the middle somehow.
That's quite interesting for our listeners to hear that about, you know, maybe pitching it bit more experimental and then pulling it back might be a trick to use.
I read that Hans Ulrich Obrist Ways of Curating book. He said like when he approaches doing exhibitions, that's what he says. I can't remember who the artist it was with that had that idea, but it was like they start the conversation like, what would you do if you had all the money in the world and you could do anything you wanted? And they start from there and then they work backwards from there. I think that's always a good way to approach anything.
So I would probably, I don't know, maybe I've already started to pitch ideas which I think will go down better through experience, but then I'm trying not to do that so much anymore and just trying to create the artworks that I want to create and find the clients for them. But I try to keep things quite experimental and free, and then like you say, it comes down from there.
But that said, like often, you know, read the room type thing. Like I'm not going to like, if someone wants an editorial illustration, I'm not going to propose making it in smoke signals out of the back of a plane or something. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes you know it's not going to work. Sometimes you know what's expected. But if there's a slight bit of freedom, it's always best to blast it open as much as you can.
I guess it's quite interesting thinking about that overlap between, because we've kind of been talking about fine art and how there's a bit of an overlap between that and fashion illustration. And Show Studio and Vogue commission artists to interpret designers' collections. Do you have a take on that kind of exhibiting or commissioning artists in that sense?
Yeah, it's massive, isn't it? It's like Raf Simons and Sterling Ruby. Because Sterling Ruby is like a fine artist that does all types of stuff, sculpture, paintings, blah, blah, blah. But he like also... his paintings look a certain type of way, which actually transfers to clothes really well because they're kind of surface design, which translates well onto garments. And then that meant that he did a few of his own clothes as artworks. But then Raf Simons was like, I mean, don't quote me on this. This is probably, I don't know if this is the exact trail of events. Through that, they started working together using his image-making process. But even just like visual artists working within fashion is like, how many Keith Haring t-shirts have you seen? Do you know what I mean? Today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've done the Show Studio collection coverage for New York Fashion Week. And as an artist, I find it quite an interesting challenge, like throughout my career, because I've done it actually when I first started. And then I did it last year as well. So it's interesting for me to be given the task of doing the coverage again and seeing how my styles kind of developed and how I approach it in different ways. And it's also, you just get total freedom to create the artworks that you want to make.
How does that work? Do you do kind of observational drawing when you're there and take it away, or is it all?
So you don't actually get to go to the shows, sadly. But well, for Show Studio, you work as the shows are going live, and then they have photographers at the shows, and then they'll send you the imagery, and you get to pick from the collections which ones you want to draw and which collections you want to cover, and it's just kind of free reign to do that.
In terms of that, do you feel like for both of you, is it necessary to keep track of what's happening in the world of fashion? Like, do you keep track of like trends or like people who are working, designers?
100%. It's a bit of a hobby in a way, I suppose. But all the way from like designers and, you know, looking at the Show Studio stuff and all that, and like models.com or whatever when the shows come out. Occasionally, I say that. I have done that. I don't do that all the time. But all the way down to just knowing like cool people.
Yeah.
It sounds really...
Yeah, like set designers I love to follow like all these people who are doing all these jobs that you don't necessarily hear about so much. Yeah, just keeping tabs on like all those interesting people who are working within the industry and with all these different designers.
That's a really good point, because you'll see Gary Card is a really good example of like, you know, the breadth of stuff that he does that's still all within fashion. He did this thing where for Dover Street, he like rather than just make a stand for the sunglasses, he made 20 cartoon heads or whatever and then put glasses on all of them. It was amazing. But yeah, stuff like that. Stylist as well, like, because I work with Simone a lot doing her illustrations, Simone Rocha, but she works with Robbie Spencer, and like some of the stuff that he does is insanely creative. Like he did a lot of the Craig Green stuff, and they're like sculptures within their own right, you know. The clothes are one thing, but it's just this whole world that comes across from that starting point.
Yeah, and then keeping track on that, and it can kind of inspire you both with your with what you're creating. What do you feel that illustration can bring to fashion, and your sense of how clients want to use it? And I'll go to you first, Jess.
I think now brands are using it and clients are using it in a way to engage with an audience in a different way, because I think we've seen so much photographic imagery. We're kind of like bombarded with that all the time. That's something that's like hand-drawn or slightly more textural, and yeah, you can just like feel someone in it, like handmade, I guess. And having that cuts through maybe when you're scrolling on Instagram. And so they're kind of using it as a way to engage more with an audience. And that's, I guess, how I felt.
Or maybe it's like it feels a bit more, there's a sense of quality to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like tangible. I suppose for me, I think it gives context, I suppose. For example, like the Martine Rose stuff, you know, it's pointing to 90s fashion quite a lot. And I mean, to be fair, she doesn't necessarily use illustration as such, but like, you know, the typefaces that she uses are a particular type of typeface that work on a particular type of garment. And if that certain typeface wasn't on that garment, the reference wouldn't be as strong. It helps give a reference more depth.
I guess it's like also what we're talking about is like fashion illustration. There's the drawing of the clothes and the looks and stuff after they're made. And then there's the kind of creation of art that's then used on fashion, which is obviously earlier in the process. Yeah. And I feel like maybe we're kind of doing slightly different things there, but it depends what it's for, the art that you're making.
Yeah,
that's quite interesting. That's sort of different, how broad this idea of what illustration within fashion can be.
Yeah.
And the different routes, say, for our listeners that might consider that they can take, it's maybe bigger than they originally expected. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I think that's like fashion. It's like when you say fashion illustration, there's a thing in your head. There's a thing that you see, and it's not actually... That's
it's
such
not
a
that
small,
tall.
yeah, exactly. yeah. That's why the course LCF is like, they changed it a few years ago. It's fashion illustration and imaging, which I think is such a good way of working around that.
I guess for people listening, maybe outside the UK, that's the London College of Fashion, isn't it? So yeah, I guess it's that keeping on top of it with trends and things like that, and the way the kind of discipline in the industry is moving.
Yeah, I mean, there's like fashion illustrators or illustrators that work within fashion that purely just drawn monsters or whatever, but for some reason they've ended up in the fashion industry. It's the same with every kind of form of creativity. The boundaries are so blurred nowadays.
I've got a question coming up, and you don't have to reveal any names, but I was interested in the challenges you might have been faced with clients. Okay. So I'm sure there's plenty of them. But like, Jess, do you want to start with?
Well, not necessarily always bad challenges, but like just challenges. I feel like every time I do a job, there's a challenge, but it's kind of also just maybe a fear that I have because it's the first time that I've done something, but then I do it and then it's like, okay, we can do that now. But even things like I've got something coming up and I've got to draw full body illustrations on A5 paper, which is not something I've ever done before because I tend to work on much larger scale. But I'm going to do it and like find out a way of working around that. And so it's these kind of challenges. And I never used to work on white paper, and the client wants white paper with like branding. So it's like these kind of things that...
So almost like pushing you out of your comfort zone, but it can be good.
But that's a good thing.
Positive.
Yeah. But in terms of like projects that have been challenging or like interesting, I did a project with an advertising agency a couple of years ago, and they wanted me to create these puppets to be used to sell the idea to the client. And they kind of came up with these like Muppet type characters and like a description of each of them. And they were like, no, keep going, like more extreme. And it was completely like not my area of expertise or anything, but I went with it. And then, the client took the job, and then they became these big life-size puppets that were walking around at fashion shows. And so that was a really weird one, and it was challenging. But
were you happy with the outcome?
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it was exciting.
That sounds great.
But that's often the case, though, isn't it? It's like, especially when you're coming at a job and you start off, it's like that, and you're like, oh my God, this is going so left of what I was thinking. But then actually when it comes around, I think that's the degree of creativity that you need. It's like coming, like trickling your idea through. Like there was probably a client and an agency at the same time, and that's like 10 people you're going through, and there's other people that you aren't talking to directly. And like if you could go through all those voices and come out at the end with something like. In my head, I'm picturing that Hieronymus Bosch painting where there's like eating humans. And but like, if you can go through all that and still come up with something that you don't hate, there is a feeling of like, oh wow, that's actually more creative than just being like, do this.
Yeah, it's like so satisfying for someone to come to you with an idea in their head that they've like visualized, but they're not creative, and then they give that to you in a couple of reference images. And it was also over a weekend in the studio, and it's like create these five puppets, and then they're on billboards, and you're like, wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I did that.
Seeing it out in the world.
So it is satisfying. Dan,
do you have any challenges? Again, you don't need to name any names.
So many. I mean, just like bad jobs, really. But I think it's like what you said. It's like that thing of people not necessarily thinking about image making as an image maker. So they're just like, oh, why can't you just do that type thing? I think, for example, like using images that I'd previously created, a client wanting to use them on their garments. And like I had a particular idea of what I wanted them to be, what they represented for me. And then the client just kind of plopping them on however they wanted. And it was just like, there's little things about the contextualization that didn't work for me. But at the end of the day, they are just pictures on T-shirts. So it's like kind of getting over yourself and being like, whatever, they just want them because they like them. That's it. Do you know what I mean?
That kind of makes me think of what I wanted to ask you next, which would go to both of you. But, you know, working with that client, working with a fashion client, and do you feel like that relationship differs from, say, other commissioners in your experience?
It goes back to what we're saying there. Like, it might be a fashion client as such, but you're dealing with these big jobs, like you're dealing with agencies as well. And like you've got a creative in sounds so rude, like at an agency who's telling you what they think just because they want to be heard and they want to be doing their job. But then you've also got the client has their own creative and the client themselves. So it's like often the actual brands are like, cool, the agency's trying to put their own stint on it or their own mark on it. That's where the problem comes. I did a thing with a brand, which again, like we're saying, in the end came out really good, was really happy with it. But the agency person, like the creative person, was really trying to push it in a direction that kind of worked for them and their idea. And the client was actually like, you know what, we've got this guy here because we want him to do what he wants to do. They literally were like, chill out, let him do what he wants, because we haven't commissioned you to make the images. They didn't say that, but they've commissioned me to make the images, not the agency. The agency are meant to help make it easier, but they don't always. But that said, sometimes having an agency involved is actually very helpful. So they're not all bad.
I think a lot of the time as well, like you say, you have to, hopefully, you're being booked because of your vision and because of your creativity. But sometimes with brands and clients, that kind of gets lost a bit, and they are trying to shape you to create a product or something for them that's going to work for them, but that doesn't necessarily work with your creativity or like your vision for how that could be. So there is kind of a fine line with that sometimes.
That's the classic thing. Like it's like the commissioned artist versus the graphic designer, and it's like you know they've commissioned you because it's not just because you make images or whatever. It's like they know you can do the other stuff. And they like always try, which is, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's totally understandable, but it can be quite difficult when you have no matter what, you approach every job thinking that like, this is the one, I'm going to do exactly what I want. It's going to be great. And it never really is. Do you know what I mean? But as I said, that's not a bad thing. It's just, there's always a certain amount of molding that's part of the job. At the end of the day, if you're commissioned, you're there to do a job, really.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I know we were talking about you both creating work that aims at the kind of marketplace in different ways. And I was thinking about, Dan, you've been painting on fabric garments. And do you want to say a little bit about that? I'm sure our listeners will be really interested to hear about how you're kind of illustrating or making marks directly onto clothes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose having worked with brands for so long and doing graphics for them, it's like, it kind of relates to what we were saying just then, is that, you know, if I want to do a certain thing, why don't I do that myself, essentially? And I've got access to a screen print studio, so I just started doing it anyway. Because I was kind of teaching screen printing once a month to get the studio. I would get the studio for free as a result, but I wasn't actually printing because I was just not in that right headspace. And then I stopped teaching there and I was like, oh, this is actually really fun. And then started printing loads. Because a lot of the projects that I do, I try and push to use, even with clients, like I've done it with YMC, we use their dead stock. That's like the ideal, is to work with clients, use their old bits and print over them, because there's just enough stuff in the world. Like there's enough art and there's enough clothes. We could put them together and probably, you know, it wouldn't be quite as wasteful. That's essentially it. It's like, if I can do it for them, why can't I do it for myself? And if I do it for myself, I can do exactly what I want. And as well as that, there's a small kind of, you know, small ethical message in there, in the recycling element. But also it means all the kind of art direction side of it, which I really, really enjoy and don't get to do as much. Because like if you're asked to do a graphic for a t-shirt, even though a client will know you have your own ideas to do that, they've got someone else to do all the art direction. So if you do your own brand, it means like it's really fun to do all the documentation. Like I've been doing stuff with AR, so like I'll scan someone wearing the clothes. I just was away in Tokyo, which was amazing, and I was there doing a residency, but I also used that opportunity to be in that place, but I could use this AR app to import the clothes into that space and almost like illustrating my holiday. It was not a holiday, it was a working trip, honestly. But illustrating that through the AR app. And because it's like, this is a project, it's not like a proper brand. It's like my friend said, like, if you say something's an art project, that means you don't have to do it quite as fully.
There's something quite interesting there in terms of painting on clothes and then testing out these different technologies, emerging technologies like AR and I don't know if AI and like, yes.
I think that's it. If you start making your own product, you know, you can experiment it with it in ways you don't have to go through a commissioning person, you know. And hopefully that means that eventually someone might ask me to do that kind of stuff for them. It's like building your own
identity.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's like branding, this kind of stuff you want to do, basically.
Thank you. And Jess, I was also thinking about how kind of a different angle, but you know, you're involved with lots of different life drawing events and taking part for clients and delivering them. I'm sure like our listeners would love to know how that evolved, like how that became a thing for you.
Yeah, so with the live drawing, I just started drawing backstage at fashion shows, I think, to begin with. I mean, after initially doing life drawing with like a nude model, just in my spare time. And then within fashion, I started with backstage illustration through contacts I'd met, various internships. And then that kind of developed a bit after a year or so, and I started getting work about doing portraits live, which then has turned into quite a large part of my practice, my business anyway. And I now have an agent who represents me for all my live jobs. So that includes portraits and window paintings.
Because you sell original artworks as well.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking about how you built up your audience for that. Was that through maybe them seeing your work through brands or...
Yeah, I guess when I first started, it was more the life drawing that I was doing. And then I created an Instagram to share that. And it just was really organic, to be honest, like through friends and then friends of friends. And then I started drawing fashion because I was working in fashion. And I feel like Instagram was so different then. That was only maybe 7 years ago or so. But you used to just post something and the creative director would repost it and the brand would repost it immediately. And now I feel like there's a lot more people to go through and everyone has like social media schedules and stuff. So I think it's quite a lot harder to get your work out there now. But yeah, back then I was just sharing stuff on Instagram, tagging all the models, tagging all the hairstylists and just trying to get it out there like that. And then in terms of artwork sales, I set up like my own website, my own web shop and started working people like Show Studio, the Fashion Illustration Gallery.
I mean, how do you feel that you've developed as an illustrator from those early sort of self-generated images to the commissions now?
Yeah, I feel like I can see a massive like evolution in the work. It still looks like the same hand, I think, which people did say from the beginning it had quite a strong style, which is still there, but it's like developed a lot. And I think there's a lot more confidence in the marks that I'm making. I do think there's like a freedom to the work that I was sharing before, maybe like 5 years ago or something. I used to post a lot more and do like little sketches and just immediately put them up without worrying too much about what they looked like, which I do miss a bit of that. But yeah, no, I think there's a definite development, and hopefully it's like still developing as well.
Jess, what sort of subject matter interests you?
Generally, most of my work is inspired by fashion. Even if that is just mark making, then yeah, it's usually inspired by the colours or something in a collection. But the majority of my fashion work tends to be these kind of like portrait focused, head and shoulders, people with really interesting looks. Like I'm always drawn to designers like Charles Jeffrey, J.W. Anderson, Roxanda, like people who use like really interesting colours or interesting characters in their clothes, and people with interesting makeup looks or accessories, like makeup artists like Lucy J. Bridge. Yeah, and then as well as doing the portraits, I do lots of blind drawings, continuous line drawings. I feel like most of my work now, I have some element of blind drawing with it. I feel like it just kind of creates these looser marks, and the work tends to be a bit freer.
So by blind drawing,
so
would you? I'm just thinking, because it's going to be something that people could try at home. But is that you not looking at the paper?
Yeah, so only looking at the subject that you're drawing and not down at the paper until you finish the drawing. But I might not do that for the whole of the drawing, but there's elements of that I tend to bring into the work, or I'll do a few of them to warm up and then bring that in a little bit. Even if I'm drawing like product, or I do a lot of still lifes now where I kind of create a bit of a narrative around that, or look at the campaign imagery and see the narrative that they've created and kind of mix that up with like product and like other inanimate objects and fruit and vegetables and all the usual still life objects. Even work I look back on from last year, I'm like, oh God.
With those challenges, keep the challenges coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Developing. And what do you feel are the main points to consider when creating fashion samples for an illustrated portfolio?
Ooh, I think like showing the diversity in what you can do. And I think kind of what we were saying before, like I have come to understand that you basically need to show someone exactly what you can do for them, but just slightly not that. So I'll draw product like perfume bottles of one perfume and then hope that another brand will be like, oh, she could do that for us. And then they'll commission that. So I think you need to kind of think about showing all the different angles that you can come in, because it's not just drawing clothes, and it's definitely not just drawing clothes in the old like traditional sense of fashion illustration, because like an actual very small part of my business is doing that.
People always say that thing manifestation, I think is nonsense. It's just that thing of like, make the work that you want to make. It's as simple as that, really. And then hopefully someone will pick it up. Like this, like I was saying about this brand that I've been doing, this Get a Life thing. It's literally just do that, so hopefully someone else will ask me to do that for them. For ages I was doing like just jackets with patches on and stuff, and I literally was like, got to the point where I was like, this is costing me so much money and I'm selling maybe 1 out of 3 of these jackets. And I just was like, I had to make a decision to be like, I can't do this anymore, it's costing too much money. But at that point I wasn't really doing the documentation. But 2 years later a client came to me and they were like, can you do that on the same type of garment for them? And like they made this whole video about it and everything. So it kind of shows you, like, especially with these kind of clients and stuff, they've got these like mood boards on their office. Do you know what I mean? You've probably been sat on someone's like mood board for like 2 years and they finally found a reason to use it and stuff. And I think, but it's like what you're saying about the breadth of what's available in the world of fashion image making. Chrissy Abbott is a great example. Like she started as an illustrator doing graphics in her own style. But then that style worked really well in image making in terms of actually how to set up photographs, which meant she became an art director as well. And I think some of that came from the documentation of the work that she'd made. Illustration can be as big as you want it to be. Do you know what I mean? It's, you know, like it's like my friend Arthur, who's like, massive art director, he did illustration at college, and he says it's really that kind of initial drawing or whatever in his head, even though he doesn't draw, but it's like starting there and pulling out,
Yeah, like making a whole world from it.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
becoming kind of like a brand within yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of applying that to all the different projects that you want to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so your work is clearly identified as like being yours. Or
Yeah.
like kind of your voice or your...
Yeah, that's 100% it. It's like the voice, isn't it? That like 101, what's it? 101 uses for a dead cat. Like how many different ways can you use your style, And it's all just about, and like ultimately you're never going to draw or make an image exactly the same way each time, or at least perhaps not as a fashion illustrator, or maybe other people do, but it just shows if you're not going to make an image the same way, then why does it have to be an image? Why can't you use that sensibility to make a sculpture or some clothes?
I know a lot of my students where I teach at Camberwell College of Arts do sometimes worry about style, and it's something that they get really worked up about, or like it's really hard to find it. Yeah. I just wanted to ask maybe you both about that. I mean, Jess, finding your style, did that come from lots of drawing over and over?
It just came from kind of the materials that I was using. Like I was using charcoal, and I got a box of chalk pastels for Christmas, and I used them at Life Drawing, and I guess I was just experimenting with them there. And then when I went on to draw fashion, I used them there. And then like I do love the kind of messy materials. Like I've drawn pictures with pencil, but it doesn't feel the same. So I guess it was for me just trying everything. And like I'm always still buying new art materials and playing about, and kind of like that childlike wonder at like all these different things and just enjoying playing, really. Yeah, I just kept going with that. And I think as long as it's like authentically from you, then no one can say that it's not your style. Like, obviously, I've been inspired by other people, and I'm still inspired by other people, like current and past artists. But it's okay for students and people starting out to copy that, but then keep going and like find your voice and like your hand.
Dan, do you have any thoughts about developing your style?
Yeah, I mean, I think my thing was just like, I would just copy people religiously for the first few years. One of them was a good friend of mine, so that was quite awkward. But then like slowly it just comes. And I think that in recent years, I've like stopped thinking about a style as such. And I think it's that thing of there's no such thing as a new idea, but mixing three existing ideas together makes a new idea. And I think I've like really taken that quite really literally, because a lot of my drawing isn't necessarily even drawing it. I'll get two eyes from one comic and then like Tank Girl's mouth, and I'll mix it all together, and then I'll put some like George Baselit's like squiggles over the top, and then I'll draw that. It's like really embracing the stuff that you're into, like with me anyway. I mean, obviously that's not going to work for everyone. It's the way that I make images, they are generally like directly mixtures of existing pictures. This whole thing of like influence and stuff, and like kind of getting it head on and literally putting it all in one place. And it's never going to look like one of those because you've got them all mixed together. During this residency, we did like a workshop, and it was really interesting because it was, I had all these big ideas about what I should do and whatever. And like Mayuki from Commune Gallery, who was arranging it, she was like, it's a bit too much, a bit too high tech. She was like, why don't you just do something to do with how you make your work? So I just printed out loads of stuff that I like, but like edited it a bit so it's just black and white. And then just had a pile of images and got everyone to just cut them all up, put them together. And it was legit. People were making like good stuff. And it was really interesting to see like, yeah, it like deconstructed in that way.
So that's maybe something that our listeners can do at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like a big part of that, like I've only recently started doing workshops, but in the beginning I was like, I have to think about what my style is and like figure out what it is that I'm doing, because I hadn't ever really thought about it before. And then to like really keep that simple to teach to other people, because I feel like a lot of the time you overcomplicate it, but when you actually think about what makes up your style, it's like very interesting to see it when you're then telling it to other people.
It's like on MasterChef where they do like deconstructed apple crumble or something. It's like it's the elements on their own rather than the thing. Anyone can generally go with that somehow, some way.
So a bit on the business side, it would be useful to touch on how you feel clients in this area operate. So how do clients find you? And this is to both of you.
I think through Instagram, through my agent, and through a network of people that I've met and grown over 7 years from like first moving down here, actually even earlier from uni, like way back, and people that I've met interning and stuff. They like come back around now because they're now art directors at brands, and then they'll be like, oh, we need an illustrator, and bring in me. Which is great.
So kind of building up that network. What about you, Dan?
I think like what you're saying is very true. And I think like what you were saying is the people that you kind of first meet creatively as like a young, student or even just out of university, everyone that's in that community that you build has as much ambition as you and is going to keep going up and up and up. And so you need to hold on to that. And essentially, that kind of initial network of people I met at college or just through like going to like parties at like the Old Blue Last and all this kind of stuff, like there's still people that like, some of those people now like are like art directors at Channel 4 and blah blah blah, and it's all just through like community is so important. But of course, like in Instagram, I've even got a job off LinkedIn, which was wild.
No way.
Community is so important. But now that does exist online as well. I'm definitely part of a group of illustrators and designers that kind of have a kinship online just through like heart emojis under each other's work and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? I think just making sure you're actively like, if you like someone's work, make it known, because it will come back around. I think trying to like go straight to a gallery or straight to the head of an agency, you shouldn't. I think it's better to just go to other artists and like other illustrators, other designers, because I've always found that's actually more fruitful, like building relationships that way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Like, I think it's quite rare to get a job from somebody that you have no connection with. Like, for that to come into the inbox is like, oh, that's new. But most of the time it's through a friend of a friend or a connection that's passed you on to someone else. And it's way more organic than
networking
people might think.
Yeah. And do you find the clients you work with are fair in terms of commission contracts?
It varies, yeah. I mean, some of them are like incredible, like pay me on the same day. It's insane, and like pay me well. But some of them takes ages and
90 days.
Yeah, I mean that's. I think I've started putting on my invoice payment on delivery, which actually seems to work, which I never thought it would. But I think you have to be really direct about that, because especially if you're getting people that are like, I did a thing for this guy the other day who was really nice. But he was just starting up this publishing company and he wanted a logo and a T-shirt design just to cover my back. I said straight away, you've got to pay me within 48 hours, by the way. And he did. It was great. But I mean, in terms of cash, like in terms of the amount of money being paid, it generally is as you would imagine. Bigger companies pay more.
Do you think your experience with clients, is it fair, Jess, do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. Like you say, it completely varies. But generally, I would say it's pretty good across the board.
Yeah.
I usually have like 30 days, and with the agency as well, that's usually like 30 days.
And then we kind of touched on that with Dan's answer about the high profile clients having maybe budgets that reflect their status. But do you think for both of you, is that something you come across?
Know.
I think what surprises me is often when you get like people that come out the blue and you're like, oh, you almost feel bad. You're like, I have to charge them my rate, but this project is so small. And then you do it, you kind of eyes like this because you feel a bit bad because you want to do it because it's a good job. But often those are the people that actually say, oh yeah, fine. Because I think they've already made that decision in their head. They want to spend that amount of money. They know what the going rate is. Obviously a big brand's going to pay you more. But I think if someone has taken an interest enough to ask you to do a job for their own creative project, generally they're sincere enough to want you to take it seriously, so they want to pay you properly, I would hope. Obviously, there's been loads of times where people ask me and I give them a fee and then they don't even reply. But
yeah.
What do you find, Jess?
I would say, like, I have worked with really big brand names, but say in terms of like live illustration, and they actually don't have the budget that other people do have, like smaller brands. And like there is kind of a set rate, like an hourly rate that we work on. And yeah, a lot of the bigger ones don't actually match that. So it is kind of interesting. But then again, maybe that's just within the company, like where that money's being allocated. And if it was more for a big campaign project, I think the money would be there. But if it's for in-store portraits or something like that, they probably have something that they're working to. But having an agent has really helped me with that, and not having to have those kind of discussions about money really does help.
But that again goes back to the like artist versus designer thing as well. Like working in a gallery, like art prices of artworks versus making that same artwork for a client, it's quite hard to work out. And there is a different, there's a different price for like certain types of art to certain types of art that's more illustrative as well. I don't know. That's quite a tough one. That's where the money gets difficult, is bridging the two between commissioned work and like gallery based stuff. For example, like if I did a screen print on a piece of paper and put it in the frame, it would by law costs more than a t-shirt. Do you know what I mean? Even though it's essentially a similar, well, not similar, it's exactly the same process. But that's an interesting thing with the whole fashion side of things as well. But yeah, it's tricky.
You might get a t-shirt that does cost more than...
Yeah, well, that's like Sterling Ruby, basically. That's where he comes in.
So I'm just going to move on to some 3 takeaways. So as a takeaway for our listeners, do you have kind of 3 things that are useful for illustrators who are keen to get into fashion illustration to know? And I'm going to go to you first, Jess. 3 things.
3 at once, hang on.
Or we could always move between you, but 3.
Yeah, let's have a think. So I would say like network is super important to really like nourish that and to be like genuine with that as well. And the friends I've met through illustration, like other illustrators, that's a really important part of that network, and it's really supportive. And to be able to have those people to go to who are kind of like colleagues when you're working alone in the studio to like bat ideas off and just go to the pub with, to talk about bad clients and stuff, like all that is super useful. That's my first one.
It's a network. Yeah. Dan, do you want to come in with one, and we could always move back to you, Jess? Gives you time to think.
I think, I think what we were saying earlier about like make the work you want to make, I think is the most important thing.
Well, in terms of building up your portfolio to represent what the work you want to get.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you want to make t-shirts, get some made. That's really basic, but
I think that was going to be one of mine. That's essentially it, isn't it? Just make the work you want to make.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to get yourself in a hole and you're making stuff you don't want to make, and then it becomes less creative, less fun essentially. But in that as well, like I think documentation of your work is really important. If you've made a t-shirt, for example, why not get your friend to wear it and like make them a mask or something like that? Like what's on the t-shirt? How can you put that in the background, And
just the quality of the photographs, if you want to put it on, say, your Instagram.
Yeah, exactly, And like, sound like an old man, but like iPhone cameras are really good, kids, and all this. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't have to have like a massive setup to make good. But even that said, like if you've got a book, take proper photographs of it.
As you mentioned earlier, using augmented reality to kind of put your clothes or things in spaces, so you don't necessarily have a really swanky camera to do it, but you can elevate your images in different types of ways.
Like for example, like if you made a book or something, rather than just do a few snaps of it, you make an animation of the book working and stuff, and like in the documentation you'll learn new skills as well, which are transferable. And that's all that thing what we're saying, like the world building of what your capabilities are as a creative.
Yes, we've got networking and then building up, kind of making the work you want to make, thinking about documentation.
So these are probably kind of on the same line, but in terms of this kind of builds on the networking thing, but like going to events and like really being out there in the industry, I felt was very important in the beginning, to meet people, to build the network, just kind of having your eyes open to like talks, industry talks, listening to podcasts like this and stuff, and like following those people and kind of like mingling.
I feel like
things.
Even though we've been saying about how you come at kind of illustration within fashion illustration from different angles, both of you have been talking about kind of this networking or going to events and being present. And whether or not that is on Instagram, say if you're not in a city, or it could be physical and virtual.
Because then that leads to like collaboration, and that's like one of the most exciting parts about the process as well. It's like collaborating with other people, and you can only do that if you meet the people.
Finding like-minded practitioners.
But totally that, like we were saying, that totally can exist purely on the internet. It's quite fun to see like people's commenting on stuff, and then suddenly they're doing work together and blah blah blah. So I think that is community is really important in all areas.
I guess if someone's listening and they feel like they're just starting off, that might feel quite daunting though, mightn't it? So it's just slow build, would you say?
I think like make sure you like follow all the artists you like and just comment on all their stuff. not like in a stalker way, but just like if you really like it, say, well done, that's really cool. You know, because it's nice that everyone involved, that's great. That's how you build connections to people that you can't physically, you know.
And any final
exercise,
Jess?
But like,
exercise from Dan.
Honestly, though, I think just get good at something else as well, because you don't want your whole world to be this. Find something else that can build confidence, and it builds confidence in other areas.
Would you agree, Jess?
I would definitely agree. I feel like recently I've kind of got these other things going on, like exercise space, and I've just started ceramics again, and having those other worlds to go to kind of stabilizes the main studio practice. So definitely.
Yeah, especially something like ceramics, because it's such a kind of give space for the mind and blah blah blah, and it's like you'll be making this, but that's the time to have ideas for other stuff.
And also don't look sideways at what your like competitors, I guess, are doing, because I feel like I've wasted an awful lot of time doing that. And it's something, I still kind of struggle with. It's like, oh, but they're doing that. I really want to be doing that. And sometimes it's inspiring, and sometimes you can just end up down an Instagram hole of just being like, I want to be doing that.
I think they're really
so know when to stop with that.
But also I did a workshop once with Zoe, who works at UAL on the commerce side of stuff, so helping people find
University of the Arts London.
University of the Arts London. But she said the most amazing thing. She said there's room in the creative industry for everybody. And in my head, I've always been oh, but she, in her saying that, I'm almost 40, and hearing that has really helped me contextualize you can, there is room for everyone, basically.
Well, thank you both for those closing comments. I think they're really good tips to take away. So thank you. For more information on terms and conditions and licensing and contracts, AOI members can check out our website for resources on these topics, plus access to the pricing calculator tool, which assists in working out fee levels for quotes, including for fashion-related commissions. There are also lots of free resources for all illustrators to access. If you haven't heard them already, previous episodes of Inside Illustration are also available, with top guests giving loads of practical information on the illustration world. Thank you for listening.